On May 22nd, sports writer and XM Sirius radio broadcaster Dave Zirin will be speaking in West Haven, Connecticut. He's written a new book, A People's History of Sport. We'll show you some of his 2007 talk in Chicago before an ISO convention. There's a new, very positive biography of Yankee owner George Steinbrenner just out. Hear what Dave Zirin said about Steinbrenner in 2007.
And I know sports is not exactly the first place that we think about when we're talking about fighting for social change. I mean, it's like expecting to hear about, Mel Gibson having a bar mitzvah, or Paris Hilton getting a job, or John Ashcroft headlining at the Apollo. I mean, these aren't things that immediately spring to mind. And if anyone who, has illusions, like how bad is it really in sports? How stupid does the discussion get? How just soul-scratchingly horrifying is the discourse sometimes in sports? I just want to say, take an hour sometime and listen to sports radio. And which is something that, to try to sell some of these books, I do sports radio. I was on sports radio very recently with a guy who goes by the name Johnny Burps. He burps. And we were talking about Barry Bonds, and he said, "You say everyone who hates Barry Bonds is a racist." And I said, "Well, no, I didn't. I said there is a lot of racism surrounding the coverage and discussion of Barry Bonds." He says, "Well, what about the size of his head?" I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He said, in this kind of way, "Look at his head. Have you measured his head? It proves he takes steroids. Have you measured his head?" I said, what am I, like a haberdasher? What do you call it? What the hell do I care how big his head is? Everybody has 10 kids. And he said, "You're ducking the question. Look at his head. Look at his head." And I said, "Sir, this is the stupidest discussion I've ever had in my life." And he said, "Are you calling me stupid?" Like he's gonna hit me. And I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, this might be the stupidest discussion in the history of the English language, because I can't speak for other languages, but yeah." And then it got very ugly. This is terrible. And then it goes to commercial, and he leans over to me and says, "Dude, great radio." My God. And this, for so many, is the politics of sports. And it is just an ugly fact that when sports and politics collide, it can range from tragedy to farce far too much of the time. Of course there is tragedy. The way the NFL worked hand in hand with the Pentagon to exploit the death of Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman, who turned down millions in the NFL to fight in Iraq, only to turn against the war, calling home and telling his family that he thought the war in Iraq was illegal, only to end up dead at the hands of U.S. troops, a fact that was withheld from his family during his nationally televised funeral. His death exploited for cheap PR, and the NFL played ball right along with the Pentagon. That is the most gruesome possible collision of sports and politics. And then there is farce. And when it comes to farce, there is no clown like Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. Now, people may have heard that George Steinbrenner now has police, ushers, and security guards putting up chains along the aisles of the stands to keep people in their seats when God Bless America is played during the 7th inning stretch. And Steinbrenner calls this, quote, "a patriotic plan to restrict movement during a time to respect the flag." Now, I really want people to ponder this for a second. Really take a moment. A plan to restrict movement during the 7th inning stretch. Dear God, fans of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but the chains on your bleachers. I mean, I swear, this is terrible, but, just between us here, you know, I mean, for someone who does what I do, George Steinbrenner is just like the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, almost want to send him a Christmas card. But there's more going on in the athletic industrial complex than just this kind of political garbage, because it's not just pain in politics, but it's also promise. Because you don't hear this on ESPN, you don't see this on your sports page, but for the first time in a generation, you have a layer of current and former athletes standing in the tradition of people like Dr. John Carlos and speaking out against injustice. Now, we're nowhere near the point where you have the Olympic Project for Human Rights turning the sports world upside down. I don't want to overstate where things are, but it's also not 1968 either. And rather than knock what these athletes are not, we need to recognize a process that is beginning to occur. Because make no mistake about it, jocks for justice are back now on the sports landscape. And frankly, if you think about it, why really should this shock us? I mean, we have a war in Iraq that's lasted longer than all of World War II. We have the great city of New Orleans dying of neglect. And we have a president who we can say, I think without exaggeration, who's slightly less popular than herpes. I mean, I challenge you to ask people, would you rather have Bush in the White House or herpes? And you will, at the very least, I promise you, you will get people to go like this. My God. Let's see. At least Bush will go away someday, but there's this whole other generation. I don't know. Yeah. It's a tough one. And actually, there was one poll people might have seen that Bush's approval rating in the African American community is 4%. I mean, you think about this, 2%. My God, that's crazy. Because it's a crazy number because the margin of error on these polls is 5%. Can there be negative support? Someone who passed away but left a note. My God.